Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 524, and today is January 8th, 2024. Thank you all so much for tuning in to the show today. Just quickly here, we have a lot of new listeners to the show over the past week, and I'm guessing we got some audience influx from mine and Connor's appearance on Part of the Problem with Dave Smith, and then, of course, I was on with Judge Andrew Napolitano on Judging Freedom last week, so we have a lot of new listeners to this show. If you're new, welcome. Very excited to have you here. We do 3 shows a week here, usually come up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sometime in the morning, covering all the latest news that myself, the team at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com put together. So got quite a bit to get through on today's show. First, just want to mention that you can find this show on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, and you can follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. I will be back on Judging Freedom this week on Thursday. I also have appearances today on the Misty Winston show. That's 5 Eastern time. I'm also on Punk Rock Libertarians today. I'm not sure if they run that show live or record it, but I'm guessing sometime this week that episode will be out. So a lot of opportunities to hear some foreign policy news this week. Let's get into today's stories. First up here, this from Dave DeCamp, January 4th, antiwar.com. U.S. aircraft carrier conducts joint patrol with Philippines in South China Sea. A U.S. Navy aircraft carrier conducted joint patrols and exercises with the Philippines military in the South China Sea in the latest U.S. provocation in the region aimed at China. The USS Carl Vinson and its strike group, which includes a cruiser, 2 destroyers, participating in the operations on Wednesday and Thursday, along with 4 Philippines vessels, including 2 former U.S. Coast Guard cutters. The Maritime Cooperative activity marks a significant leap forward in our alliances and interoperability with the United States. It also demonstrates our progress in defense capabilities and developments as a world-class armed force, and that was a statement from the Chief of Staff of the Philippines Armed Forces. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin was asked about the joint drills and denounced them as a provocation. He said, "We would like to stress that the U.S. and Philippines' muscle-flexing provocative military activities in the South China Sea are not conducive to managing the situation on handling the sea and maritime disputes." The U.S. and Philippines relaunched joint patrols in the South China Sea in November, marking the first in 7 years, but this week's patrols were a much larger show of force, as only 1 American littoral combat ship and surveillance plane participated in November. And the littoral combat ships are known as the LCS, or little crappy ships, because they are so inept and ineffective. So this is a significant step forward. The U.S. and the Philippines restarted the patrols amid soaring tensions between Manila and Beijing in the South China Sea, where the 2 countries and several other Southeast Asian nations have overlapping claims. In 2023, the frequency of Chinese and Philippines encounters near disputed reefs skyrocketed as the U.S. and Philippines bolstered their military alliance. And for anybody watching the show, Dave includes this very nice map in his article with all of the claims from different countries as to where their maritime borders in the regions are. And as you can see, there's, significant overlap, not just between, say, the Philippines and China, Vietnam and China, but Malaysia and the Philippines, Malaysia and Vietnam. And so there's a lot of overlapping claims here that the U.S. feels the need to be involved in. And, that's unfortunate. Dave wraps up his article here by mentioning that some of the encounters between the Chinese and Philippines vessels resulted in collisions or the Chinese Coast Guard firing water cannons. The incidents mainly took place when the Philippines were trying to resupply a ship it had grounded on the Second Thomas Shoal, a reef claimed by both sides. And this is just like a semi-large ship that's in way too shallow water. It's in like, 2 feet of water or something like that. It's absolutely ridiculous that the U.S. is willing to push China over this. So the Philippines president, Marcos Ferdinand Jr., also known as Bong Bong, has taken a much harder line against Chinese claims in the South China Sea, and has been emboldened by increased U.S. support. After each encounter in the South China Sea, the U.S. reiterates that the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippine vessels in the South China Sea, meaning the U.S. is ready to intervene if the dispute turns hot. And I think, the real risk here is a slow escalation where the Philippines takes, what they maybe see as smaller steps, and then they keep getting backing from the United States, which encourage them to act more and more boldly. Next up here, North and South Korea fire artillery near border. So this is an article that I wrote for antiwar.com on January 5th, and I'll have some like little additions to tack onto the end of this because this isn't the latest news coming out of the Korean Peninsula. So following a series of provocations by the US and South Korea, North Korea responded by a major artillery drill. Pyongyang fired over 200 rounds in the direction of a disputed border group of islands in the south that belong to South Korea. Seoul subsequently ordered the evacuation of residents of 2 islands. On Friday, North Korean forces fired artillery towards the South Korea island group. In a statement published on North Korean media, Pyongyang said its military staged a naval live-fire shelling drill into 5 districts with 192 shells by mobilizing 47 cannons and various calibers of 13 companies and 1 platoon force from 9 to 11, I'm guessing that's local time, on January 5th. Seoul responded by ordering the evacuation of the islands and holding live-fire military exercises. Pyongyang said Seoul overreacted to the North Korean drills. This is the quote from KCNA, that's North Korean state media. The claim of the military gangsters of the Republic of Korea that the KPA fired naval artillery shells into the waters of the North Islands, a so-called buffer zone in the West Sea of Korea, is far-fetched assertion to mislead public opinion, and their evacuation and firing in return are also a trite method to throw the responsibility of the escalating tensions on the KPA, the Korean military's drill. The direction of the naval live shelling doesn't give an indirect effect on the islands. And so I'm not exactly sure what happened here, where these shells were fired from and where they actually landed, which, would give us maybe a hint if the South Koreans are trying to exaggerate what the North Koreans were doing, or if North Korea is now just trying to downplay. North Korea said its drills were in response to the U.S. and South Korean war games. The naval live shell firing drill conducted in the southwestern sea is a sort of natural countermeasure taken by the Korean armed forces against the military actions of the South Korean military gangsters, who stage a large-scale artillery firing and maneuvers in the vicinity of the entire border area. The military gangsters of South Korea should neither say this or that about the responsibility of escalating tensions, nor bring misfortune on themselves. In the past month, the U.S. and South Korea have held a series of provocative war games. The drills included simulating the assassination of North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, submarine live-fire drills, and joint war games involving the U.S. with heavy weaponry near the Korean border. Since taking office, President Joe Biden has restarted war games and strategic weapons deployments to the Korean Peninsula that were paused during the Trump presidency. During Trump's time in office, Washington and Pyongyang were in a historic period of diplomacy and demilitarization, which, has been completely unwound by the Biden policy. Now, there has been 2 more days of these artillery drills, and from my understanding, they were conducted on both days by both sides, although I'm not certain if North Korea and South Korea both did both days, or maybe one then the other. But the way I read the news stories was that both countries have now conducted live fire artillery drills for 3 consecutive days. And so this does seem like a major escalation. Now, I certainly think everybody on the Korean Peninsula has an interest to keep this at the kind of minimal confrontational level. The escalating tensions, I'm guessing from the Korean side, are going to be seen as an opportunity to test military weapons, fire missiles and things like that, where if they were in another period with the US, say under a Trump administration, where they had the ability to try to ease some sanctions in exchange for demilitarization, then they might not want to carry out those missile tests. And so I think, North Korea is going to carry out some more tests here, maybe even a nuclear test, although I'm not sure on that. The US has been predicting that North Korea was preparing a nuclear test for almost 2 full years now, and that has not panned out or happened yet. They have tested a couple intercontinental ballistic missiles, put one military satellite into orbit, and are trying to put another 3 into orbit this coming year. So it's kind of the North Korean side. My concern here is in Washington, where I don't think the White House wants to fight another major war, or maybe even has the ability to fight another major war. But you do wonder, like, who's in charge of the Korea file in the White House, and what checks are placed on that person, and how far that person could escalate the situation without receiving meaningful pullback. We know people like Eli Ratner have a lot of control over the China policy. Brett McGurk when it comes to the Middle East, Victoria Nuland. And so is there an extreme Korea hawk maybe that is in charge of the Korea file? And then what happens, say, when, we just had the situation in the White House, which seems unbelievable to me, where Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was in the hospital for 3 days before Biden was aware of that. And why that seems important to me in this situation, if we have this escalation on the Korean Peninsula, not to give too much credit to Lloyd Austin, who of course is well entrenched in the revolving door in Washington, and a former arms manufacturer, and so he has his own personal pocketbook incentive to escalate to war. That being said, I think he values the lives of U.S. troops and understands the logistical challenges that face the U.S. military, and so having him involved in discussions would probably be important at this time, because he's going to push towards de-escalation, whereas some of these civilian lunatics that the Biden administration has brought in, Ratner, McGurk, Nuland, somebody like that could really get us into a lot of trouble very quickly. And so I think there's reasons to be concerned here and to continue paying attention to it, especially when we had this next article we're about to talk about. Got a lot of news on the Middle East here to finish off today's show. U.S. officials warn, Biden is leading the U.S. into a major war in the Middle East. So this is from DateDeCamp.antiwar.com, January 7th. As tensions are soaring in the Middle East due to the brutal Israeli onslaught in Gaza, U.S. officials are warning that President Biden's decisions could lead to a major regional war. U.S. officials told the Huffington Post that if Israel provokes a full-blown war in southern Lebanon, the consequences would be catastrophic. Every scenario shows that this will escalate into something terrible, whether in terms of counterterrorism or war with Iran, one official said. The officials said that many in the Biden administration feared unconditional U.S. support for Israel could embolden the Israeli officials to expand operations into Lebanon. Last week, Israel significantly escalated the situation by launching a drone strike in Beirut that killed a senior Hamas official who was involved in hostage negotiations. The U.S. official said, "I've been trying to keep an avalanche from falling on Lebanon, and so have a lot of people. The problem is no one can rein in Biden, and if Biden has a policy, he's the commander-in-chief. We have to carry it out. That's what it comes down to. Very, very, very unfortunately." Another U.S. official said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant and Strategic Affairs Minister Ram Dermer are hell-bent on seizing this moment to expand the war into southern Lebanon and deliver some mystical imagined death blow to Hezbollah. The U.S. and Biden energy envoy Amos Hutchinson, who good article at antiwar.com. If you go look at James Carden's archive at antiwar.com, he has a good article on Amos and his questionable ties. So Amos to try to reach a diplomatic solution between Israel and Hezbollah, but no progress has been made. U.S. officials told Politico that the administration is drawing up plans to respond to a protracted regional conflict. Lebanon is just one area where Israel's assault on Gaza is spilling over into the region, as the U.S. and its allies are threatening to strike the Houthis in Yemen over their attacks on the Israel-linked commercial shipping in the Red Sea, and the U.S. is already in a low-level conflict with Shia militias in Iraq and Syria that could explode. Just one note on the situation in the Red Sea. Something that I've been seeing going around kind of right-wing Twitter as proof of something very nefarious happening. They're saying, well, look here at the Red Sea. None of the Western container ships are getting through, but China is able to send their container ships going through. So doesn't that prove there's something really nefarious going on here with the Chinese, and aren't the Houthis controlled by China? I think rather what it points to is that China's Mideast policy is based on one of commerce, and them not explicitly backing the Israeli war against the Palestinians mean that the Houthis are going to leave them alone. Also, the fact that, they have relations with Iran and aren't constantly trying to upend and start wars in the Middle East means that China has a lot more diplomacy in the region than the U.S. does, and so their ships get to keep going through. Now, I haven't actually confirmed that all Chinese ships are going through or anything like that. This is just a point that's being made on Twitter, and I think that it actually proves the opposite of, again, what a lot of right-wing Twitter is saying. So back to Dave's article here. Instead of pressuring Israel to end its brutal assault on Gaza and ease tensions with Hezbollah, President Biden is opting for regional escalation as he continues to provide Israel with full-throated military and political support. All right, next up here, let's talk about Israeli military chief says fighting in Gaza will continue all year. So the head of the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, said Sunday that he expects Israel to continue its brutal assault on the Gaza Strip all year. He said, the year 2024 will be challenging. We will be at war in Gaza. I don't know if it will be all year long. We will be fighting in Gaza all year, that's for sure. This will hold the other arenas, certainly in the West Bank, to a certain area of alertness. He also warned of the possibility of another war in Lebanon as cross-border strikes between Hezbollah and the IDF have increased since Israel launched drone strikes in Beirut that killed a senior Hamas official last week. On Saturday, the IDF spokesperson said Israel is moving forward. Israel will focus its operations in Gaza on the central and southern portions of the Strip, where most of the 2.3 million Palestinians who live in the besieged enclave are located after many fled Israel's bombardment in the north. The IDF chief signaled Israeli operations in the north will wind down, claiming Israel has dismantled the military framework of Hamas in the area, and said there continues to be fighting, but Hamas had left without framework or commanders. Now we are focusing on dismantling Hamas in the central and southern Gaza Strip. We will do this differently, though, based on the lessons we have learned from the fighting so far, the IDF chief said. According to the latest numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry, 23,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, mainly women and children. As the siege continues, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are at risk of dying of starvation or disease. Despite the horrific situation on the ground, the U.S. continues to provide unconditional military support for Israel. All right, next up here, this is an article from the Associated Press. And so this is just what this Associated Press reported, I believe, on Friday. An Israeli strike flattened a home Thursday in the area of southern Gaza that the military had declared a safe zone as Israeli troops pressed their assault in the nearby city of Khan Yunis. Palestinian hospital officials said that the blast killed 12 people, almost all of them children. And I happy that the mainstream media is reporting this, as just factually as they are at times. I know the television, CNN, Fox, and stuff like that is still pretty awful, but some of this print stuff, the headlines are usually pretty terrible. In that case, it's always that the Israelis were killed by Hamas and the Palestinians just happened to die. But some of the reporting, even from the Associated Press and some of these other mainstream outlets, has been just pretty open and shut about what Israel is doing in identifying things that are obviously war crimes and reporting on them. So, it's important to highlight it when those things get said, because a lot of people like to point out, oh, you have bad sources and you're anti-Semitic. Well, this is just, what the AP is reporting what happened in Gaza. All right, next up here, this from Politico. White House feels no need to assess if Israel is violating international law. So Politico reports the Biden administration has been deflecting accusations this week, that would have been last week, about Israel's actions in Gaza, saying it isn't committing acts of genocide, but it also acknowledges it conducted no formal assessment of whether Israel is violating international humanitarian law. A senior administration official denied Israel is committing any ethnic cleansing or genocide. If you just look at what Israel is doing, they aren't systematically targeting civilians, which, is just obviously and completely untrue from anybody paying attention. Multiple Israeli government officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, have called for resettling the Palestinians outside of Gaza. The Israeli operations in Gaza are causing widespread famine and disease. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said, "I'm not aware of any kind of formal assessment being done by the United States government to analyze the compliance with international law by our partner Israel. We have not seen anything that would convince us that we need to take a different approach in terms of trying to help Israel defend itself," which is just absolutely disgusting when Israeli officials are openly calling for genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip and had absolutely decimated and obliterated huge portions of the Gaza Strip. All right, next up here is another article I wrote for antiwar.com on Friday. October 7th probe ignites tensions between military and Netanyahu allies. So, my article, tensions between the Israeli military and several Israeli politicians boiled over during a war cabinet meeting about an investigation into the October 7th Hamas attack. The government led by Benjamin Netanyahu has deflected blame for the Hamas intrusion into southern Israel. Several reports have produced evidence that Tel Aviv should have been able to prevent the attack. During the war cabinet meeting, the Israeli military announced plans to conduct an official inquiry into the October 7th Hamas attack. The Financial Times reports one Israeli official confirmed that the Israeli military representative was attacked by several senior ministers over both the timing and makeup of the probe. Benny Gantz, a cabinet member and minister of the National Unity Party, said that the probe was a politically motivated attack in the middle of a war. Gantz said, "I participated in many cabinet meetings. Such conduct has never occurred and must not occur." The Financial Times reported the argument was sparked, according to the official, by Transportation Minister Miri Regev, a politician from Netanyahu's Likud party who is seen as an ally of the Prime Minister. Regev's intervention was followed by far-right ministers such as Smotrich and Finance Minister Ben-Gvir. Smotrich is the finance minister, and Ben-Gvir is the national security minister. Smotrich, an extremist who called for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, explained there had been a heated discussion in the cabinet about the timing of the probe. The investigation follows a lawsuit by survivors of the Nova Music Festival who claim the Israeli government failed in their duty. The lawsuit says a single phone call by the Israeli military to the commander for the party to disperse it immediately, in the view of the expected danger, would have saved lives and prevented the physical and mental injuries to hundreds of party goers, including the plaintiffs. The Israeli government ignored warnings for years, months, and days before the October 7th attack. According to the New York Times, Tel Aviv received a detailed copy of the battle plans used by Hamas. This is the Times article. Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plans for October 7th attack more than a year before it happened, documents, emails, and interviews show, but the Israeli military and intelligence officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. Haaretz notes that in the months leading up to the attack, the Israeli intelligence community received a report from a source inside Hamas that from inside Gaza that Hamas was gearing up for an assault on southern Israel. The outlet additionally reports that the day before the attack, the Israeli military had enough details about the attack to begin to prepare and warn the Nova concert goers. Netanyahu has refused to accept responsibility for the attack and claims that an investigation is inappropriate while the war in Gaza is ongoing. Throughout his decades as prime minister, Netanyahu has supported Hamas in order to prevent negotiations on a two-state solution. And there I linked to the article by Scott Horton and co-host of the show, Connor Freeman, where they explain all that. So if anybody, doesn't believe me there, go to Scott's bio, our author archive at antiwar.com, and it should be the first article there. It's by him and Connor Freeman. It's quite a long read, but it is very thorough and really explains, in Netanyahu's own words, why he spent so long supporting Hamas and how he believes it benefited Israeli policy. All right, next up here, Qatar tells Hamas hostage families that Israeli killing of Hamas official in Beirut complicates negotiations. So the Qatari prime minister and other officials met with family members of 6 Israeli captives held in Gaza on Saturday and told them that Israel's killing of a senior Hamas official in Beirut made negotiations on a new hostage deal much more difficult. Israel launched a drone strike in Beirut on January 2nd that killed the deputy chief of Hamas's political bureau, who played a key role in negotiating the deal that returned over 100 Israelis and 200 Palestinians to their families. A day before the drone strike, Israeli officials told the media that Hamas was showing a willingness to negotiate. Qatari Prime Minister hosted families of Israeli hostages in Qatar and told them that Qatar was committed towards working towards their release. He said, "We have engaged directly with the hostages' families to share as much information as possible and to assure them that Qatar is committed to using every resource to secure their release. We will continue to engage with these families." The official said that Qatar is making every possible channel, but stressed that Qatar is a mediator and does not control Hamas. The official said that it became increasingly difficult to maintain channels of communication due to the escalation of bombardment in Gaza and elsewhere, which candidly complicates the hostage negotiations. Besides sabotaging negotiations, the Israeli airstrike in Beirut also increased the risk of a major regional war that could draw on the U.S. Hezbollah has vowed retaliation and says it fired 62 rockets at an Israeli observation point on Sunday, which it called a preliminary response to the assassination of the Hamas official. The Israeli strike on Beirut marks the first time Israel bombed the Lebanese capital since 2006 Lebanon war. In November, Axios report that U.S. officials are worried Israel was trying to provoke Hezbollah as a pretext for a wider war in Lebanon. All right, a little bit more details on what's happening here with the fighting in northern Israel with Lebanon. So this from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Still angry at the assassination of a top Hamas figure in Beirut last week, the Hezbollah movement carried out what it called a preliminary response, trading heavy fire with Israel along the Lebanese border. Hezbollah focused the attack on a hilltop observation point, firing 62 rockets. The outpost was purported to be for observation and aerial control. Israel later confirmed the attacks hit the strategic airbase at Mount Meron, though Israel was somewhat late in commenting at all, beyond saying that they retaliated against the terrorist cell. Israeli officials ultimately admitted that the Mount Meron sustained extensive damage from the strikes. Mount Meron is an aerial control site for the Israeli Air Force and essentially serves as the Northern Air Control Unit. The Hamas strike came with anti-tank missiles, not smaller ones that could be intercepted by the Israeli Iron Dome. What's embarrassing is that Israel doesn't have a way to intercept these missiles, which fly at low altitude. Essentially, they had to sustain all the damage to the base. It is not clear how functional it remains after the attack. Hezbollah did, however, release videos showing a number of direct hits, destroying radar systems that gave Israel the coverage of airspace far into Lebanon. Such coverage may well have helped Israel in Tuesday's assassination, the assassination of the Hamas official, which was against the capital of Beirut. The base still may be used for direct observation, but anything else is probably destroyed. The assassination is a politically difficult for Israel because the Hamas official was a high-profile player in negotiations for the hostage exchange with Hamas and was said to be trying to work on another one when he was killed. Israelis with family members held by Hamas in the war are not happy to see the opportunity for an exchange squandered by military force. Israeli hawks are practically chomping at the bit to start a big fight in southern Lebanon, but here too there is strong opposition. The United States, usually a backer of all things unilateral in Israeli action, have warned against significant escalation. This is related to an intelligence assessment by the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which said Israel would have a very difficult time contending with a lot of additional military action on their northern border. Given that they are already an enormous undertaking of the Gaza war, they would be spreading themselves thin indeed. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said, in no one's interest to expand the war beyond Gaza. The Israeli Defense Minister Gallant said Israel was stood to an agreed upon diplomatic settlement, but obviously cautioned that they are close to the point where the hourglass will be turned over. So it sounds like, Gallant is saying the same thing he's been saying for a while, that we don't want war right now, but we have our eyes on it definitely. And so this is really problematic. The U.S. doesn't need another major Mideast conflict. All right, next up here, Iraq's prime minister moves to expel U.S. troops after drone strike. So the Iraqi prime minister said Friday that his government is beginning the process that would lead to the expulsion of foreign forces, including about 2,500 U.S. troops. And this is, there's something really amazing here, right? We were supposed to be electing Joe Biden to be the anti-Trump president. And here in the beginning of January, 4 years after Trump, carried out an assassination strike on Qasem Soleimani and, got threats of having U.S. forces kicked out of Iraq, here we are seemingly having the same conversation. Now, there are a couple things that are different. The one that I think works against Iraq being able to kick out American forces is Qasem Soleimani and al-Mohandes, who was the leader of the Popular Mobilization Forces at the time, who was killed in the strike alongside Soleimani. I think were far more popular and important figures in Iraq and the Middle East in general, but particularly in Iraq. And so I would assume that whatever political forces were happening in Iraq aimed at expelling American forces in 2020 were stronger based on that than they are now. However, this is 4 years later, so that strike is still in the minds of everyone. This U.S. strike happened just around the Soleimani assassination, which I'm sure is, adds to that and brings up that memory in Iraq. And I'm not sure what the Biden administration's response will be. Trump took a very hard line on this and threatened to basically, I guess, dismantle the Al-Assad air base in Iraq, saying that we're going to take, everything we built for Iraq with us on our way out the door. I'm not sure that Biden would take such a hard stance. And so we will see what happens here. My guess is that the U.S. puts out a statement saying that, we agree that in a few years we'll start to withdraw forces or something like that. After the Soleimani assassination, the U.S. Officially repurposed. We're no longer conducting operations in Iraq. We're only training Iraqi forces, they say. I don't think this really changed, at least not to any real extent, the actual U.S. operations in Iraq over the past 4 years, but they at least changed it in name because of the pressure that was put on the U.S. government after the assassination of Soleimani. So we might see something similar, but I'm not sure that that they're going to have more pressure now than they did in 2020. All right, last article up here. This one is can't remember what the source I got it from, but it's a statement from a container shipping giant, Maersk, and I think it's a Danish company. And the statement said, "We have therefore decided that all vessels due to transit the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, will be diverted south around the Cape of Good Hope for the foreseeable future. The situation is constantly evolving and remains highly volatile, and all available intelligence at hand confirms that the security risk is to be at a significantly elevated level." And so, of course, the strikes are happening to these ships with ties to Israel off the coast of the Red Sea due to the Israeli ethnic cleansing operations in Gaza. And the Houthis, I think, one, are just trying to stick up for the Palestinians. I don't think this is completely a move aimed at benefiting the Houthis, but I do believe that the Houthis do see this as a real opportunity to gain a lot of legitimacy in the region. They went from being at war with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, probably the two most powerful Arab states, and now are in a position where those two Arab states can attack the Houthis without going to war for Israel, which would be a major problem, So I think this has probably really benefited the Houthis politically in the Middle East, and that's really important to understand here as to part of the reason why that this is going on. I believe they say that the trip going around Africa rather than through the Suez Canal adds about 10 days to shipping into Europe. And I'm not sure, I'm sure there's a significant difference between if you're trying to bring goods all the way to Israel or Syria or Greece or something, Turkey, countries that are in the far east of the Mediterranean Sea versus, Spain, the UK, Portugal, something like that, where you don't even have to enter the Mediterranean Sea, you're just in the Atlantic Ocean. So, I'm not sure how the time difference for all these countries are, but apparently the added estimate is about 10 days. All right, everybody, that wraps up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And remember, I'll be back on Judge Andrew Napolitano's show later this week. I'll be on Misty Winston's show today at 5 p.m. So check that out. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. Back with more later in the week.